On the 26th of February 1918, thousands of people arrived at the Happy Valley Racecourse in Hong Kong to watch the second day of an annual derby. The event was so popular that dozens of extra stands, complete with food stalls, bars, and betting stations, had been set up to accommodate the crowds. It was these extra accommodations, however, that would ultimately result in one of the worst disasters in sporting history. The Happy Valley Racecourse was built in 1845 in the Wan Chai district of Hong Kong. Great Britain had taken control of Hong Kong as a colony in 1842, when the Treaty of Nanking was signed in the wake of a war between the British Empire and China. At this point, horse racing was not a popular sport in Hong Kong, but the British expats that settled there wanted to bring one of their favourite pastimes with them. The first ever horse races in Hong Kong were held at Happy Valley. The site itself was built on what had once been swampland. It was a flat piece of land that was surrounded by hills. It is picturesque now, but was much less so at the time. In the 1840s, the British Army had used the area as a military camp, but it was closed down after too many soldiers succumbed to malaria. The area was then used as a cemetery. The name Happy Valley was invented by British soldiers with a morbid sense of humour, as the area was known for being somewhere where many people died or were buried. By 1845, though, the British decided to construct a racetrack in Happy Valley. It proved to be an incredibly popular venue, with locals as well as the British. As races there became more and more popular, the facilities at the site were gradually upgraded. It went from being a dirt track carved out of swampland to a world-class sporting venue and social hub. Each year, a special event to signal the beginning of the racing season was held at Happy Valley. It was 3 days of racing in February, featuring some of the best horses from all over Asia. It was always a popular meet, and by the early 20th century, organisers had begun installing temporary stands just for this event, to accommodate up to 3,000 extra spectators. These stands were called mat sheds and were made out of bamboo and palm leaves, common for lightweight or temporary structures throughout China and Hong Kong at the time. Some mat sheds had as many as 3 stories and could accommodate up to 300 people. There was usually a space for food and beverage stands on the ground or a basement level, while the upper sections provided fantastic views of the track. The food stalls generally used charcoal fires to cook food or boil water for cups of tea. For the 1918 meeting, 19 mat sheds were constructed in around 3 weeks, mostly by Chinese contractors. The structures were supported by bamboo or wooden planks that were driven into the ground or were fastened to nearby trees or buildings. Some were supported by the mat sheds on either side. Commercially, mat sheds were run by so-called men of substance, landowners, stockbrokers, tavern owners, and so on, each of whom paid a fee to the government for a license to do so. With the license costing 706 Hong Kong dollars plus around 180 Hong Kong dollars for construction costs, the expense of running a mat shed added up to more than a year's average salary for most residents of the colony at the time. This was big business. Safety checks were held a few days before the event. Police and fire personnel were responsible for these, but inspections were often delegated to junior cadets. These young and inexperienced employees rarely ever highlighted anything that might pose a hazard. The opening day of the derby on the 25th of February passed without incident. On the 26th of February, thousands of people returned for another day of racing. People from all over Hong Kong were in attendance. British, Chinese, Indian, and Portuguese communities were all well represented. Often, whole families would attend together. Children, while not able to gamble, were still welcome to enjoy the racing. After the morning's races concluded, there was a tiffin break, a chance for spectators to purchase food and place bets ahead of the afternoon's races. However, as the horses emerged and headed towards the starting line for one of the most hotly anticipated races of the day, a shout was heard from one of the mat sheds. This was followed by a rush of people frantically fleeing the stands. To most observers, it soon became clear why. Two of the match sheds, numbers 6 and 7, were starting to sway. The collapse that followed was witnessed by a reporter for the Hong Kong Daily Press, who wrote, "The stands fell gradually outwards and made a sound like the rasping of a saw. It looked as if the tops of all the stands had been connected by a wire, and that this had been used to pull them over gradually. The stands and booths took about 10 seconds to collapse. As many of the stands relied on the adjacent stands for support, the collapse began a domino effect. As one stand fell, it brought down the next one and the next. Before anyone could react, a large section of the temporary stands had collapsed, creating a mound of wood and bamboo, underneath which as many as 3,000 people were trapped. In the immediate aftermath, there was a moment of relative calm. People struggled to get themselves free or dig out others. There was, of course, a great deal of confusion and urgent activity, but no sense of panic. Minutes later, though, white smoke started to rise from the wreckage. Coal fires from the food and drink stands had set the fallen mass of wood alight. It had been a dry winter, and as the wind picked up, the fire spread rapidly. The crowd reacted with horror. The reporter from the Hong Kong Daily Press went on to say, "The outbreak caused a terrible panic. Hundreds were thrown to the ground who would otherwise have had no difficulty escaping. Once down, they were finished. The clouds of smoke must have suffocated many. Children were swept along, and I fear that several of them must have been trampled to death." Hundreds of people scrambled desperately to rescue trapped family members, but the fire was spreading so quickly that it was nearly impossible. After just 5 minutes, it was too hot for people to approach the wreckage. A boy named Paulo Xavier saw his sister Daria pinned down under some bamboo poles. He tried to extricate her, even as the ruins around them were engulfed in flames, only finally giving up when his sister told him to leave and save himself. Another member of the same family, Bino Xavier, managed to escape the collapse initially, but realized that he had left the cash box at his family's betting booth. He dashed back in to retrieve it, but became trapped by more falling debris, and never made it back out. There were members of the local fire brigade at the event, but they had no fire engine and no hoses. A human chain was formed to transfer water in buckets from a hydrant at the nearby golf club, while people waited for fire and rescue equipment to arrive. This took about 15 minutes, by which time it was already too late for many of those trapped in the wreckage. Even once hoses were brought to the scene, there were too few and too little water available to adequately fight the fire. Within 20 minutes of the collapse, the entire matchshed section of the racecourse was on fire. Within 45 minutes, it had been reduced to ashes. Officially, 614 bodies were recovered, although some records suggest that as many as 687 died in the fire. Several hundred others were injured. The victims were predominantly Chinese women and children. Requiem services were held in Hong Kong, Macau, and cities across China. The tragedy, insurmountable as it was, resonated with communities far and wide. At the resulting coroner's inquiry, it was concluded that the disaster could have been prevented by the exercise of foresight, and foresight which one might reasonably have expected before the event, and which is certainly easy to expect after the event. In particular, it was thought that the combination of lightweight temporary stands and the coal fires situated directly below them posed a danger which could have been anticipated. The governor of Hong Kong, Sir Francis Henry May, took responsibility for the disaster, saying, "I blame myself as regards the non-provision of fire precautions, because I was head of the police here for 9 years, and I never anticipated a fire in these match sheds." He banned the use of temporary stands, and the construction of permanent grandstands began soon after. They were ready in time for the Derby the following year. This event was marked by a greater police presence, smaller crowds, and more firefighters and firefighting equipment on hand throughout. In 1922, a memorial was erected to commemorate the dead, which is still in place today. Happy Valley Racecourse remains a huge attraction in Hong Kong. It now has a capacity of 55,000 and has not experienced another collapse or major fire since the one which cost so many innocent lives in February of 1918.